We got lucky today at Goanuchar because today we have a world-renowned architect with us, Mr. Vinayak Barne. And I'm very much proud because he's been taking Goa to the world. Okay, talking about our state, such a small state, to the world again. And yes, so the first thing that we'll be picking up is going to be a question from his book that has come out post the pandemic. So first question that goes and first word that I see is urbanism. So what is urbanism? If I had to tell the people of Goa, the people watching us, the audience watching us, in a few words of what urbanism is.
Yeah, it's a very simple thing. So urbanism is a word that some of us use to describe a collection of all the disciplines that make a built environment. If you think about it, we have architects doing buildings, landscape architects doing open spaces, engineers doing infrastructure, sociologists studying human behavior, planners and policymakers writing rules, administrators in the city running the engine, politicians making important decisions. All of these people help in some way or the other to make our cities. Some of them make places that are visible, entities that are visible. Some of them, through policy, etc., are invisible. But the fact is, all of us, in different ways, contribute to the making of cities. Right? The difficulty is, all across the world, these disciplines have divorced themselves from each other. They don't know what to talk to each other about. And that's the way education continues as well. So a landscape architect, you're lucky if a landscape architect gets involved in significant landscape policy in every city. It doesn't happen. An architect usually is concerned only about his site. An engineer thinks that roads are only meant for cars. So problem is, the big music that we were trying to create, which is the city, the place that we were supposed to be living in, has now become cacophonic because somebody is playing the violin very well, somebody is playing the cello very well, somebody is playing the tabla very well, but they're all playing it as if there's no combined piece of music to cater to. And the result is what we see around us. All across the world this is happening. So urbanism is a term that many of us now have come to the realization that the missing link in our field is to bring these disciplines together and help them remember that Babare, we are all playing our instruments which we know well, but there has to be a bigger music that we are doing together. Yeah. And so urbanism, the best analogy is it's a maestro. It's a discipline which is the maestro discipline. It doesn't know how to play any of these instruments because that's each discipline sort of doing its own thing. But you need a maestro because a maestro knows the entire piece of music. He knows or she knows when to make the music loud, how to cater to the audience, what is going on. That's what we've been missing. Now, I wouldn't be saying this if all of you had said, we love our city. We just absolutely love it. We think it's the greatest thing in the world. That's not what we hear. That's not what we hear across the world. What we hear is we love old parts of our cities, but the new parts are terrible. So there has been a disconnect. Urbanism as a discipline was always there in our cities. There came a moment, whenever, 1920s, 30s, whatever it was, when a massive rupture and an over-specialization took these disciplines away from each other. The time is now to bring us back together. Bring us back together, realize that every single one of us matters. Every single one, every single discipline is equally important. It's not hierarchical. And the only thing that is important at the end of the day is not buildings or a park or a bridge, it is the city.
Now that I've got a clear-cut idea of what urbanism means, okay, not the whole of it, but a gist of it. The reason we are doing this and the reason we do Goanuchar is because we are worried. We are worried about the direction that Goa is going into. And again, being the youth, we are confused. We don't know how to take it forward. We have a lot of troubles. We have a lot of protests. We have a lot of fight for nature. We have a lot of fight for heritage. We have a lot of fight for the floods that are happening. We have a fight for housing that is happening. And today we will be discussing all of this. So the first thing that we would want to address today is majorly going to be, we've seen in recent times that we in Goa had mega fights and mega protests for nature. We fought against the railway tracks. In a lot of opinions that we got, we cannot stop development. We cannot stop development in happening. We need that kind of a development to sustain. For example, the minor example that I give is our chargers. We used to have 5 watts chargers. Now we've got 65 120 watts chargers, and we need that kind of an infrastructure to support those. So how do we create a balance between a better city which is livable, okay, but still keep the nature alive within the city? And how can architects help us in doing that?
So I'll begin by saying that, what makes me really upset about our field, and when I say our field, I'm talking of all the fields combined, okay, is that we have reduced architecture to an aesthetic field. We judge architecture and aesthetics. We prioritize aesthetics. Everything we do in conventional architecture is about aesthetics. The big impression is to create a bang based on aesthetics, which is sad because we have reduced it to a less relevant field. Architecture was never, aesthetics is a given. We're supposed to be damn good at it. It's a given. The question is, what are the other issues that you're talking about? And anyone will tell you that the greatest contribution of any field, anywhere, is that it engages with the most pressing issues of its time. So, in the 1920s, 1930s, whatever, the way architects were doing architecture or designing places was something that they were catering to at their time. Maybe it was right or wrong, that's a different story, but those were issues that were dominant at that time. Today, the biggest issue facing us is climate change. It's a huge subject and it's real, and natural destruction and all kinds of things. The second big issue that's facing us is socio-economic polarization. The rich and the poor divide in the world is everywhere, is increasing, and they're interrelated. Because if you don't cater to this divide, the nature keeps getting destroyed. Creeks keep getting destroyed. Because we know this in India. I mean, look what's happening. So they're interrelated issues. Now, in a small place like Goa, we don't have this colossal number of divides as you find in metropolitan cities. I'm telling you this in advance because this is an interesting recognition to say that we can do things in Goa that are not possible in large cities in India. Large cities in India and other places have gone so far beyond their peak that we don't even know where to start to make change. It's very difficult. But in Goa, we are not at the tipping point yet. So coming to your question about nature, there are two kinds of natures when it comes to cities. There's nature outside the city and there's nature within the city. And they're both important. Nature outside the city means that if you have a forest or a wetland or a Kazan land or whatever it is, how as architects do we make sure that we allow growth in our city without taking this away? Because if we think about it pure logically, cities can grow in two ways. They can either spread out or they can go up. And the choice is ours. So if you want your city to spread out, it will logically eat up the nature that's around it. So that decision is really up to our field to engage with politicians and leaders. The second issue is we don't want that to happen. That may happen in some places. The other thing to think about, if you don't want that to happen, you have to go vertically. Now, what does vertically mean? What is vertical? How vertical? Are you ready for vertical? Are the streets ready for vertical? Are infrastructure ready for vertical? Those are important questions. That's one. So what I'm saying is, you can't ignore what is outside the city first. When you talk about nature within the city, it's of a number of kinds. You have creeks, which are, take Panjim, you have beautiful creeks. You have beautiful streets, which are themselves forested landscapes. I mean, look at the trees in Goa, they're magnificent. They're probably 200 years, 300 years old. You will never find such trees in so many parts of the world, right? So this is the beauty of the tropics. So you have forested landscape, you have jardins and parks and all these things. So we have all this that is there. The question is, how do we keep it going? And so I'll say two things. What we've realized is that nature within the city works best when you have an attitude that is positive to it, in the sense that we should not be turning natural entities as backyards, right? So if you look at, for example, I'll give you a simple example. Don't make a literal comparison. You take the canals of Amsterdam. All of you know that. Simple canals. The whole city was designed around canals. Now, each of those canals is the foreground of the buildings. There are small, 4-story, tiny little buildings, but they all face onto the canals. They all face onto that open space. That is the heart of the community. People come and hang out there. So it is not the natural feature alone. The natural feature has now become amenitized. It has become celebrated in the city as the most important space. People relate to it. They want to keep it. So preserving nature, conserving nature in the city is not about saying, I kept my creek going with some trees. That's not it. It is about engaging with the creek in a very positive way. So what this means for architects is that when you think of parks, streets, creeks, streams, it is not about keeping the natural element alive alone. It is about planning what is around that natural element with development that is so compatible, so sensitive, so beautiful, that there is 24/7 security in those places. Because if you don't bring security, those creeks are going to become dangerous crime-infested backyards. Again and again, this has happened all over the world. So the conservation of nature in the city is not about preserving natural elements alone. It is looking at natural elements, taking the surroundings of the natural elements, amenitizing them, using the highest standards of ecological ideas, and then bringing development into these places that is compatible to that natural element. And I'll conclude by saying this. If you think about environmental conservation, we are typically of the opinion that we're going to leave natural conservation to environmentalists, to biologists.
Yeah.
It is their profession. We are architects, we want to do cool buildings. I think that's completely incorrect, because if you think about environmental conservation, it has two sides to it. One is the conservation of nature, but one is the avoiding of the destruction of nature. So environmentalists are involved very heavily in conserving nature.
Yes.
But architects, planners, urban designers, our field is responsible for making sure that nature is not being destroyed. So we have a huge role to play in the environmental index. We are the field, I'm talking of the big field, we are the field that decides how much urbanization can take place, how much the city spreads, in what form, can we reduce the carbon footprint, can we create buildings that are compact rather than spreading out. And the more we think about it this way, the more we realize we have such a big role to play in conserving nature hand in hand with our environmentalist friends. So architecture is a field that is right up there. It is one of the most consequential fields when it comes to environment today. And if we begin to think of it that way, rather than going into aesthetic issues as the starting point for our field, I think we can get somewhere.
Yes, now that I think of this, if I take an example of the creek here in Panjim itself, okay, I say it is being neglected by the people because it has got neglected by the infrastructure first. Nobody, it is like you said, it is at the backside. It is at the backside of the house. Okay, there is no importance given to that creek as such here in Panjim. But similarly, if we could by any chance correct that part and give it more importance, when you build those sitting spaces, walking spaces around it, a viewing gallery for all the buildings facing the creek, would that help making it better?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you from studies all across the world, if human behavior has any overlaps, Goa is different from Amsterdam, but humans are humans, at least somewhere. There is no question in anyone's mind that amenitizing, making these fronts, not backs. The moment you have a natural element, it's like a living room in a city. Yeah. Don't treat it like the back door of your kitchen or something. That's what we're doing. We're treating them like garbage dumps. They're back. If you go there, if you go to the back side of your kitchen, that's where you go to dump your garbage. That's what we're doing. But if we think of them as the living rooms of our city, they are most beautiful spaces. This is where we want to take the tourists. This is when we want to take our visitors, our cousins who come to visit us. If we treat these open spaces between our buildings as the living rooms of our cities, they give them so much attention that they are beautifully designed, beautifully built. That, I think, is the attitude that can change our cities.
So now that we spoke about nature within the city, but in Goa as such, let's say take an example of Panjim. There's a lot of nature that lies outside the city. Let's say, for example, Pato. There's a place, if you look around, there's mangroves just beside it. Okay. What is the responsibility of an architect, or how can an architect help? Okay. To make sure we preserve that too.
Right. So again, we are not using the word architect as a building maker in our discussion, at least today. It's very important, because I don't want anyone to think that architect means I'm only doing buildings. The moment you change this definition that architecture is about making places, everything changes, right? So all of a sudden, landscape is part of it. Who said that you were doing a building? Architects can do whatever they want. Architects are designers. You can design streets, you can design buildings, you can design the edges of creeks, you can design infrastructure. The moment you bring design in, you have elevated anything you do. That's what makes architecture so wonderful. So, what Panjim is missing, in my opinion, is a robust open space plan. It has never been done. Okay, what I mean by this is Panjim was a built from scratch city. I want you to understand the relevance of this. It was built in the 17th century by the Portuguese. It was planned from scratch. There are very few cities because most cities grew from villages organically. But there are cities in Goa which were planned from scratch. Panjim was one of them. And it was
Vasco is another
Of
one.
course it is. So these are incredible privileges because there was a lot of thought that went into understanding the site, the terrain, everything. And the Portuguese did it brilliantly. Panjim was a city which was planned along the banks of the Mandovi. They knew it was a monsoon climate, it would flood. So what they did is they sloped it in such a way they created a swamp on the other side of Antainish. Half the water would drain there, half the water would come towards the Mandovi. And then within this Panjim itself, it was designed with a grid. That's a very beautiful thing. So the greatest thing Panjim has is a continuous street grid. You can walk from anywhere to anywhere, right? The street grid was defined with beautiful buildings that defined the street, and then smeared between them was a complete beautiful network of streets and parks. Look at the Jardin near Church Square, look at Church Square, look at Azad Maidan, look at the Promenade, look at Miramar. It was all a network of open spaces. Look at the little garden right outside where we are sitting here. These were all little green spaces, and there were beautiful streets with trees that connected them. So there was a robust Rua de Oren. And then there were areas like the creek where there was nature, mangroves, that mediated between the high tide and the low tide water. Now nobody has mapped, at least recently, nobody has done a robust study of Panjim which forgets the private world, forget the world of the developers, forget the private parcels, just take the open space network and ask the question, where is the gap in this open space? Where is the tree cover missing? Where are the mangroves broken? What can we stitch? Can we bring back a robust open space network in Panjim? Why is this such a wonderful and important project? Because all of these open spaces the land on which they are is owned by the government. Which means that you don't need any private developer intervention, right? If the government understands the relevance of making these open spaces beautiful, you can do it tomorrow. You don't have to negotiate with anybody. So what we propose in any part of the world when we go to transform a city or change a city is do not begin transformation of your city with private development. It's ridiculous because every developer has their own interests, it becomes complicated. Start developing your city through public improvement projects. And in Goa, public improvement doesn't mean some widening of roads or anything. It means exactly what you're saying. You take Rua de Oren, you take the creek, you rethink Pato. Pato has a humongous parking lot. Humongous, you have seen it. That is the biggest tragedy in Panjim. Why? Because that parking lot is in a business district which has only offices surrounding it. Past 6 o'clock, it is a wasted resource.
Absolutely.
Think about this.
Have you guys seen Pato at night? Empty, right? What's the point of having those empty parking slots there?
Yeah. So there are simple things like this. So what Panjim needs is a robust, it's like being a doctor. I consider myself to be a doctor of cities. You have to have that seriousness. I'm not an artist. I may be like artist somewhere 50th down the list, whatever. But the first thing is you have to have an attitude of a doctor. We need, in our profession, what we need today is the attitude of a doctor that knows how to diagnose the problems of a city. And if it's a building that will solve the problem, you make a building. If it's a street that will solve the problem, make a street. If it's repairing a creek, you repair a creek. That kind of healing attitude is what we need today, not some crazy, that age, I think, is over. And if we don't have this attitude to our cities, then I don't know what is going to happen.
You guys have any questions regarding nature and all the things that we spoke about? Yeah? Done.
You spoke about the cities growing either up or spreading out, right? What do you think is the right way for Goa, say Panjim? Because when you go up, if you consider Miramar, the Karanzalam area, there is one building called the Crescent, which goes up and it somehow doesn't fit in. So is up the right way?
Yeah. So it's a classic question that many of us are asked all the time, which is a good question. So think of it this way. Growth is a natural process. All of us grow. Even I'm growing right now, right? You're growing right now. So what I'm saying is the growth of any city has two attitudes to it. You can either shepherd the growth intelligently, or you can let it be ad hoc. 90% of the way we do. Okay, so shepherding the growth of a city is called planning, urban planning. The commentary, maybe whatever it is, but that is essentially why urban planning is a field. You shepherd the growth. And then you write all the instruments like policies, whatever, to shepherd that growth. So all the regulations, all the laws, what are they? They're instruments to shepherd the growth of a city. Is there an answer whether Panjim should go up or down or whatever? Maybe it's all of them, right? Maybe a little bit in all of them. Maybe you want to grow your hair, but maybe you want to keep your tummy tucked in. Maybe some other person wants to make his hair short and pull his tummy out. We don't know. It depends on what you want to do. But the bottom line is it's conscious. It's not unconscious. It's not like saying, I just do whatever I want. So what planning is about taking a city and asking 3 or 4 very simple questions. 1, how much is the city expected to grow over the next 10 or 20 years? This is a question we never ask. So what we do is we do speculative planning. Speculative means, right? That is not good. Okay, so the first attitude is you can't do planning forever. Planning is done over 5 years, like financial planning. Your money, I'm going to look at what my increase is over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. It's not forever, right? Same thing with the city. So if I have a city today, how much do you think Panjim will grow? Is the population going to double? Is the economy going to increase by 2-fold? Is so much development going to come in that ideally these are the questions we begin with. Once we have some idea of this question, we then ask, based on this information, where should that growth happen? Where? Right? Where? Should it happen inside the city? Should it happen outside the city? Second question is why? Right? Why should it happen inside the city? For instance, if there is a big train corridor or a big road that is already being planned, okay? Maybe you want it to be tall there. Why not? The infrastructure is already there. So you identify areas and you say, okay. And then you say, because we want to concentrate growth there, the other areas, we don't. So you stop growth in those areas. That's like putting your tummy in. I don't want my tummy to come out, right? I want my hair to grow. So you say, I'll let my hair grow. So you make a decision. See what I'm saying? And then, as a result, you write rules for where you cannot touch, where development cannot happen, which is preservation of nature and all these things, and where development should happen. And because you now know where growth has to happen, you then prepare your city for that growth over the next 20 years. So what do? You put more sewage under the road. You bring electricity so that when that growth happens, you are ready for it. This is planning, right? So in Goa, we are not there yet. Even in India, we are not there yet. It happens in some cases. But the point is, that's okay. We may not be there yet, but the question is, can we start? That's what we're talking about.
We all know that Goa is a tourist state, basically. So in terms of tourists, does Goa need growth? Because according to them, they are fine with whatever we have. Because according to them, Goa is a really big thing from coming somewhere very far away. But does it really need growth, Goa? Because in terms of tourism and nature.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not the expert on Goa yet. Okay, maybe I'll never be. So I can't answer that question because that depends on the data, right? I don't have the data.
In terms of growth, to urbanize the area, in terms of tourists.
Floating population?
Yeah.
You mean for floating population?
Yes.
Well, I mean, the answer is I don't know, but if there is a floating population that is big enough and it is really affecting our economy for the better, say you depends, I don't know what's going on, but say there is enough floating population in tourism that our economy really depends on it, which means that we cannot ignore them, right? I mean, they are here. So the question you have to ask is, how do we cater to them? Do we cater to them only through massive beach resorts? That's one way. And even if you design beach resorts, what is the form of these beach resorts? Is it just gigantic buildings or is it towns and villages? Right? I mean, I'll tell you myself, I have been part of projects where our clients insisted that these projects should not be designed as buildings, resort villages, but as villages. So you walk, literally, you're walking, it's a resort, but you're walking through streets and blocks. So there are ways of designing projects which are far beyond buildings, where you can bring in nature, you can continue, that's one. But the bigger question to ask is, even if you're catering to a floating population, do you have to build new projects outside the city? Or can you cater to them within the city and then allow them to use this incredible ecology that Goa has to promote a different kind of tourism? I mean, so, there's a lot of questions like this. I don't know the answer per se, but intuitively, I would say it's nothing to worry about, because whether Goa has to grow or not grow, the questions are still the same.
So my question has to do with, if you are localizing development in some areas and you're saying some areas are, say, closed off for their heritage value or something like that. So if on a developmental level you want to isolate some areas and you want to develop much like infrastructure in another area, how wouldn't that create some kind of divide where if you're preserving an area with such an intense focus on preservation, that area also has its people living in it, and it also has like a vibrant ecosystem. How do you put the brakes, say, on development in that area and preserve its authenticity while still allowing for that area to grow? And connected to that question is the fact that everyone has these nostalgic thoughts of this old city, or the city as it was in, take Fontainebleau in Panjim. Like, that's what everyone thinks of Goa as. So if we are developing and if we are concentrating our people and our infrastructure in another areas, like where you want you say where you want your hair to grow, right? So if we're concentrating our infrastructure in other area, won't that lead to a completely different kind of urbanism, a different kind of urban form, and a different experience of the city?
Yeah.
So how do you keep that attachment?
Okay. So if you look at any beautiful place that you have visited, that you came back and said, oh, I really love it. I don't know what they are, but they exist, right? All over the world. You guys take expensive tickets and fly there for holidays because you don't live in places like that. What a pity. So, right, you go to these places far away to enjoy a week off. Wow. Right? And you come back. Now, if you look at all these places, one of the beautiful things about all these places, anyway, whether they are in India, I'm talking of the pre-modern era, historic places that you visit and fall in love with. There was something very consistent about historic places. Have you heard the word the city and the country? Right. These were English words, but they have a lot of meaning. Everyone had a city and a country. A country was very different from the city. All right? They were not the same. And they were kept that way. That's why we love it. So in Goa, for example, there is a village, there is a suburb, and there is a town. In my opinion, there is no city. Goa does not have cities. You guys think Goa has cities because it's small. But from where I see it, Goa has never had a city and probably never should. Goa is nothing but a series of towns and villages with beautiful ecology in the middle of it. That's what keeps Goa beautiful. So now, a town is different from a suburb, is different from a village. Why? Because the relationship of nature to built form and the relationship of infrastructure to built form is different in each case. So, for instance, I come from the village of Madkai near Ponda. That village is one spinal road with a temple of Navadurga in the middle and little houses on both sides with agricultural fields around it. That's it. That's the village. You go to Kourang, it's the same. You go to, you know what I'm talking about. It's a simple village. Now, if you start bringing robust infrastructure in there, that village is gone. If you increase the density of that village is gone. So, what will keep it a village? The relationship of nature to built form has to be pretty seriously proportional. Nature has to dominate to such a degree. It doesn't mean that you don't want to increase the height of your buildings. You can, but only by so much. Maybe one-story buildings become 2 stories. It's okay. But that's not going to change the infrastructure that much. So that's number one. Now, there may be, due to whatever reason, certain villages in Goa that are urbanizing so much that they're almost becoming towns. That's okay. That's life. Right? Certain villages, the economy comes in, people come in, they put in more money, some company wants to come and set something up there, so more people come to work there. I mean, that's how cities grow. So you have transitional areas where what were once villages are now becoming towns. That is where you have to go in and decide how much growth do you allow. Are you going to allow 5-story buildings and make it just like the middle of Azad Maidan? Or are you going to keep it somewhere in the middle, right? 3 stories, maybe some infrastructure, but the nature is still there. So those are called transitional areas. Then you come to a place like Fontainebleau, which is a historic suburb. So it's already there, it's cooked, right? So you have 2 choices. You either let it get destroyed and forget the history and raise it, or you keep it as a conserved area. Conserved means that you don't allow it to densify, right? This is a place where you put your foot down and you say it's a heritage zone, like the one we are in, heritage zone, and these buildings are going to stay exactly the way they are. Inside you can do whatever you want. You can modernize them, you can bring infrastructure, you can make it the most impeccable infrastructure within the houses, but outside they will remain largely what they are. And then the 4th place is places like Azad Maidan. If you look at Azad Maidan, if you look at Azad Maidan 50 years ago, it was, or 60, 70 years ago, it was 2-story buildings. Some of them are still there. That Gomes house, for example, the yellow house, still there. That's what it looked like. But right next to it now are 4 and 5 and 6-story buildings. I see personally no reason not to have the 6-story buildings, because that's where growth should happen. You have a large square in front of you. Why would you not raise the density? That's good. But there are concurrent questions that emerge. How will you park them? Right? Are you ready? Is the infrastructure of Azad Maidan ready to take this? So that is where we need comprehensive understanding of density. So what I'm trying to get at in conclusion is the difference between a village, a town and a city is crucial to architects. One of the biggest problems architects have is they don't understand the difference between a village, a town and a city. So if I gave you the design of an apartment building or a bus stand in the middle of Panjim and in the middle of Madkai, you guys will do the same thing. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that. Because in your mind, there is no distinction. You don't have the eyes to read. I didn't many years ago. But then you all of a sudden wake up one day and say, why is Madkai? Because it doesn't have a bus stand that would be like a bus stand in Panjim. So how do you design a bus stand in a village? Why is it different? These are architectural questions. And if you don't ask these questions, then you're half asleep, because you're doing stuff, but you're not seeing the bigger picture. And that is where urban design and all these other disciplines help you. They help you wake up. Instead of saying, my little building, they say, it's my little building within something. And if you don't understand that within, then what is design? So.
Okay. Now, we know India, again, we are very lucky to have this predictable monsoons as such, okay? And we exactly know, okay, these are the 3 months where rains are going to come. But still, we have these problems within the city, like flooding. Last year, we had this. Year before, we had this. And the year before also, okay? And now, when we say flooding, we don't say that flooding is happening only in the cities and where the old places, Portuguese time era, problem. This flooding problem is also happening in the latest infrastructure that has been done. That's part. So, how do we take care of this? And the question why I'm asking this is, for example, these guys are going to pass up and be the future that they are going to set for the city, for a lot of people. How can they contribute to getting these problems solved?
So as I said, architecture is an allied discipline of many fields, right? Okay. The question is about monsoons, right? I mean, monsoon, some of us call it monsoon urbanism. In other words, our cities have to respond to the monsoons. If our cities are designed like other cities where monsoons don't happen, then we are really idiots. Right? Because the monsoons are a great gift, but it's also a challenge. What are the opportunities? The opportunities is that we don't have to do things like recycling water, harvesting water. We have so much water. Thank God, man. I mean, I worked in desert climates where every drop of water had to be recycled. We don't have to do that. Second, water is a wonderful thing. If you can take water and use it properly and flow it and clean your drains, and you can have annual replenishment naturally in all the natural systems. This is what nature does. It brings water, it refills the water, it cleans the water. Like all the creeks originally were naturally cleaned. The rains came, The water was clean, the old water went away, the new water came in, it took the water into the sea. That was part of, now with all the nonsense that happened, we plugged it, we did this, we did that. And that's where the trouble happens. The third issue is flooding in Panjim. And the answer is very simple. The flooding problem in Panjim is entirely solvable. 100%. Because there are drains that are already under the roads. Those drains exist. I mean, they are already there. There are a couple of places where those drains need to be connected or, dug or... So it's like I said, Panjim needs an open space plan. It also needs a robust infrastructure plan. That's all it is. So this is all part of what we call a CDP. If you do a comprehensive development plan for Panjim, you're going to have to do an infrastructure plan, an open space plan. Each of them is a chapter in the report. But that's what we need. So as part of a CDP, a good CDP, you would do an infrastructure plan for Panjim where you would study the flooding situation. You would figure out what needs to happen. You would figure out whether the sluice gates are blocked or working. You would bring a civil engineer. This is not our expertise as architects, but you bring qualified engineers. You figure out the solution. I can tell you with confidence that the flooding problem of Panjim can be solved. What does it need? It needs a comprehensive, focused attention to the issue. It needs political backing and it needs investment to make it happen. That's it. It can be done. I can tell you with a straight face, it's solvable.
Now, the second problem that Panjim faces is parking. Again, I'll give an example of our old city Panjim, which was planned before by the Portuguese. Okay, and we created a new space which is part of. Okay, at a certain point, especially during an hour in the morning, around 11:30, probably when people come out, they're out of parking. How could we solve that part? We don't have much space.
Yeah, I mean, if solutions were this simple, everyone would have solved them.
Yeah.
So, nothing is simple. Why is it not simple? It's not that there aren't solutions, but like I was telling you, if today some of us identify a range of solutions, the question is, which one are you going to pick? You might pick one, she'll pick another one, you'll want a different one, you'll want a different one. That's the difficulty we're having in Goa. Everyone wants different things. So that's where we have to have a process where we figure out what to do for the collective good. But that's a different story, right? That's complex discussion. Parking. So here's how I'll answer that question as simply as possible. The history of any historic town, Panjim is a historic town, any historic town is pretty predictable. In the early phases, when it was designed before the cars, it was just this tiny little beautiful thing, 2 stories, most people walk, some carriage, some car, life is good. Then there comes a phase where the early buildings start rising up. But nobody's cared about parking because there's enough space on the street, it'll take care of itself. So the rules are not written for parking. Then all of a sudden, the champagne bottle bursts and every family has 5 cars or 3 cars, or I have 2 cars, my sister has 2 cars, So everybody has cars, everybody wants to drive, everybody wants to park in front of where they are going.
Yeah.
Right? No, I don't want to walk to Gita Bakery 2 blocks. I want to be right in front of Gita Bakery. My God, you guys are amazing. And then you're sitting and you're complaining because everybody is doing the same thing. So it's said, right, if you're walking and you have a small piece of paper, and you throw it on the ground and you say, small piece of paper, what harm is it going to do? But if 1 billion people do that, you're finished. So that's the issue with parking. So there was a time in Panjim when Panjim had no cars, small, whatever, little, right? That was the early days. Then there was a first generation of the transformation of Panjim where modern architects came and started designing big modern buildings. Value building. Remember? Value building on Church Square, the Kamath Hotel building on the Church Square, the Junta House, these were massive buildings with no parking. Think about it. Where was the parking? There's no parking on the site. Parking was supposed to be on the street because the rules said, well, it's totally doable. Cars are less. The density of the cars had not increased. The street width is the same. But the pressure cooker is rising now. Pressure is rising. The car. Then there came a moment where more and more development began to happen and people got more cars. And now Panjim became a pressure cooker. And the pressure is serious because the streets are the same inside the city. The space is the same, the pressure is 3 times or 5 times or 10 times, and on top of that, we don't want any inconvenience. We want to be in front of Gita Bakery. So what are the solutions? I'm putting solutions in quotation marks because I don't know if they're real or not. They can go from social changes, behavioral changes, to technological solutions. There's a range. Like I'm saying, I'm the doctor, I'm giving you solutions. The social changes, which are more like holistic health, like social changes means you don't poke a syringe, I don't cut you open. I just change your diet or some exercise and you'll be fine. It'll take a little time, but you'll be fine. There'll be a little inconvenience, but you'll be fine. So a lot of cities across the world have done something very simple. You know this, they've introduced public transit. I think there was a study done on Panjim, a beautiful study I am told. I have not seen it, but I'm told it's a very intelligent study where there were buses that were introduced within the city, and so the moment you introduce buses of different kinds or whatever, the expectation is you make parking expensive. You make parking expensive in parking lots, parking structures, so it's a disincentive for people to park, and as a result people take public transit. The public transit is of very high quality. The public transit that students sit in is different from the public transit that a major industrialist sits in, whatever, we can decide. But in other parts of the world, this has been successful. There are case studies in places like Goa, comparable to Goa, outside Europe, even outside Europe, where these kinds of ideas, where public transit has come and lowered the index of driving and the parking problem has been mitigated. That's solution number one, at this extreme. Then there are solutions that purely rely on technology. They usually work very well in nations that are affluent and have robust infrastructure. For example, you could have an app on your phone, right? That app the city could have cameras, and the app could document every single parking stall that is in the city. And if you don't get a stall at Gita Bakery, you look at that app and you say, oh, okay, I can get next block, right? But what does that do? All of a sudden, that doesn't solve the parking problem. It actually only makes it more convenient for you, right? But it's still a step in the right direction, because instead of now wasting time driving, you have taken the first step to using, for example, if we acknowledge that Goans are not going to stop driving, if the decision that people above us who make the decisions, they say, Babare, if we tell people to take public transit, they're going to be upset. Say this happens. We should not do that. There is another solution where you can have an app and whatever. Will this work in Goa? I don't know. And then there is a third solution, which is something which could destroy Goa, which is now you say, you know what, let's design multi-story parking structures. Like, make Goa a city, make Panjim a city, a big city, huge parking garages, big stuff. Personally, that's like surgery, cut it open, it's hurting. Doctor, it's hurting. I don't care. Right? This is what I'm saying. It's like it's invasive. You're invading the city. Panjim is saying, Duktare, Naka. You're serious. No, you're saying. So, what I'm getting at is there are various methods of thinking about this. Some will be inconvenient, but will give you long-term benefits. Some will be invasive. They will give you short-term benefits, but the long-term impacts will be very bad. Which ones we choose to take? It's not up to me, it's up to you. The message is only this. At the end of the day, what I've realized is if you make it about you, it's over. I'm speaking for myself. If you don't make it about you, it's a lot of incredible stuff. So, architecture, all this allied field, everything we're talking about, it's not about you. It's about everything else. It's not about creating a cool building. It's not about winning an award. If you can go past that and think of the real issues without worrying about anything, it takes a long time to get there. Believe me, when I was 25, I was on fire too. But you got to calm that fire down as you grow big and grow up and figure out what all this is. That's one. Second, we can only try. The results are not going to be in our hands. So I think being a practitioner is about trying. Being a practitioner is not about being successful all the time. Because if you had consistent success, that means somebody else is failing. So it's about you. That's a problem. Think about this, right? How can everything be the way you want? What about you? Right? We all want the way we want. So it's not about you. So you have to try. Okay? The third is it's collaborative. You don't know everything. The most important thing I've learned in life is that if you have the courage to say, I don't know everything, it's a wonderful thing, because then everybody is a resource. If you say, I know everything, everybody is an enemy. All right? So your whole attitude to the field changes. Your whole attitude to everybody changes. If somebody is doing good work, acknowledge them. Don't shut them down. If anyone is doing shitty work, keep quiet. Don't waste your time criticizing them. Just do what you think you do. And the last thing I'll say is about architecture. This is the last thing, which brings me back to where I began. We have reduced our profession to an aesthetic field. Don't let that happen. Okay? Architecture is not about style. Making architecture about style is like me looking at your face or your t-shirt or your hair color and making an impression of you. Is that true? No, but we do that for architecture. It's the worst thing you can do. So we criticize, my God, this building is not modern enough. This building is too traditional, this building. So what is it that is consistent about architecture? Quality. It doesn't matter. I was telling all my friends over the last week, you cannot judge architecture in a city by style. You can judge it on quality. You can see a quality building in 1 minute. It could be completely traditional. It could be the restoration of a house, or it could be an impeccably modern building. The quality shows in one shot. So this is what Bruno taught me. We would go driving around Panjim and he would say, that is the hand of a good architect. It doesn't matter whether the building is traditional or modern. So the moment you go beyond style and learn to look at architecture without worrying about anything, you have now become an urbanist. Because you now know that it is not about one utopia, it is about many utopias, many opinions coming together. The only consistent thing is that they care. Good architecture means they cared. Good details, good, it looks good. If something is good, means they cared. So care. And as long as you do that, step into your own. That's the only thing I can tell you. And then once you're there, the rest is an endless journey of discovery. You don't worry about what others are saying about you because you don't know anything anyway. You're learning every day from everyone instead of being the master architect that says, I know everything, I'm going to wear black and you're going to listen to me. That's the problem.
Thank you, Vinayak sir, for giving your valuable time. Guys, out of all the sessions he's been here for a few days, he's made time available for us at Bodhachal and for you guys. And he was very excited to know that you were coming here for this particular session. So yes,
thank you all. It was wonderful.
And thank you. And I would really want to thank the chairperson of this place, that's Goa Forgiving, the Shine Rooms, who made this place available for us on a short notice, and Armando, who actually connected me to you.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.